And welcome to another 30 minutes of Point of View. This is Josh Barnes, and I am the host. Justin's not going to be joining us today, so it'll just be me today. And we are the show where we have no problem looking at political issues from a biblical point of view and any other cultural issues that just pop up. The reason we do that is because Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. This is historically provable. And since that's the case, it's kind of obvious then that the Bible is true because Jesus said that the Bible is true. Jesus said he was God, and then God raised him from the dead. So obviously he was God, and the Bible is true. And if the Bible is true, then we should be biblical if we want to be right about issues. But here's this episode today. We're going to be dealing with another one of those questions. Is the Bible true? One of those accusations against the foundation of this show and the foundation of our worldview. If the Bible's not true, conservatism is not right. Atheism, if atheism is true, then it's true that, abortion's fine. All these things are fine. Morality is relative, all those things. So it is important that the Bible is true. If the Bible is not true, we're wrong, and we need to start living like the truth. We got to start reflecting the truth in our lives. So we're going to deal with this. Bart Ehrman, we've been dealing with him. Last week we did 3 of what he said were his best arguments against the Gospels. And he did this. He actually gave this lecture in front of, and I'm going to read this to you. Let's see. The Defenders Conference. The Defenders Conference in 2019, October 2019, at the Defenders Conference, Bart Ehrman gave this talk, if you will, this teaching. And this is actually a conference of Christian people, and he was going before Christian people and trying to convince them with the best arguments that he has against the historical reliability of the Gospels by saying that the Gospels are contradictory. They contradict each other. And so these are his best arguments for Christian people. Since our audience is Christian people, I decided I would present his best arguments. Now, we have already got comments on our video from last week saying that we misrepresented Mr. Ehrman. I don't think we did. We pointed out that his arguments were really bad, and they are. And if you think that they aren't really bad, if you think that they are really good arguments, then show how they're good arguments. Yet last week we walked through 3 of his first 3 arguments, which were the problem with Jairus. Jairus' daughter died, and in one gospel record, when Jairus comes to Jesus, he says, "My daughter's about to die," and then on the way to help his daughter, someone comes and says, "Your daughter is dead." But then in another gospel, Jairus comes to Jesus and says, "My daughter is dead, will you come help her?" Well, one gospel is obviously summarizing what happened, because instead of giving all the details one bit at a time, it's giving us a summary. So it's not nearly a contradiction, and that was we showed that. If you want more info on that, we'll go ahead and watch part 1 of this series. Then there was another argument that was the 2 different genealogies for Jesus in Matthew and in Luke. And of course, we've dealt with that many times. Every person has more than one genealogical line, and these genealogies are not said to be exhaustive. They're skipping from one person to another in order just as memory devices. So this is really shallow. It's not at all contradictory, and this is the point. So if you think that it is contradictory and you'd like to prove that, then go ahead and prove that. But don't tell us that we're knocking Bart Ehrman or being rude to him. We're just presenting his arguments and showing how they're faulty. And then the third argument we dealt with last week was the argument from the settlement of Christ's parents in Nazareth, because Ehrman says that in one gospel, he goes to, after Jesus is born, they go to Egypt. In another gospel, after Jesus is born, they go to Nazareth. Of course, they went to both. They went to Egypt and then to Nazareth. And this was even said in the gospel that said he went to Egypt. Nowhere does it say he went directly to Nazareth in Luke. That's an assumption that's made. Luke is gathering eyewitness testimony, and he's giving the things that happen. He's not giving them and saying that they had to happen in that exact order without anything in between them, and that they had to, immediately afterwards. And this we're going to see actually in some of the arguments he makes today. So let's see how many we can get through today. This again is the second. He ends up giving, I think, if I counted right, 7 total arguments in this speech to Christian people at the Defenders Conference. And so here's argument number 4 that he gave. And this is on the veil in the temple. Here's what he said.
Here's one that's kind of interesting that you can easily come up with an explanation for, but it's a contradiction. So Jesus is crucified. And in Mark's gospel, you have this amazing scene where Jesus dies, and his last words are, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? And he dies. And it's like, I think he's genuinely asking, where are you? He dies, and the curtain in the temple rips in half is the next thing that happens. The centurion says, truly this man was the Son of God. Luke has the crucifixion, of course. Jesus is crucified. And he has the ripping of the curtain in the temple. But Luke is explicit that the curtain rips in half before Jesus dies.
Okay, so
read it yourself.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted him before he was done. So in Luke 23, we read, and it was about, verse 44, it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. So in Luke, he talks about darkness. He talks about the sun being darkened, the veil of the temple being rent, and Jesus crying with a loud voice, commending his spirit to God, and he gives up the ghost, he dies. In Mark, we read this. Verse 37, and Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost, and the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. And when the centurion which stood over him against him saw that he cried so loud and gave up the ghost, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. Okay. Matthew says it this way, verse 50, when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he yielded up the ghost, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. Now, let me just ask you, does that, just initially, without even just thinking through this, does that sound like a contradiction to you? Does it sound like Luke is trying to say that the veil was rent after Jesus died, and that Mark and Matthew were trying to say that it was rent before he died? I'm sorry, vice versa. Does it sound like Mark and Matthew are trying to say that the veil was rent after he died, and Luke was trying to say that the veil was rent before he died? No, it's certainly not. First of all, the people there who found the veil would not have also been there at the cross. They didn't have their watches synchronized. All we know, and all that Luke and Matthew and Mark are trying to convey to us, is that the veil was rent, and it was about the same time that Jesus died. That's all that they actually knew. Right? They actually don't know whether it was right before, right after, or at the exact same time. I imagine they all assumed that it happened at the moment that he died. And so at the moment that he died, Luke is expressing to us that it was about the 6th hour. About the 6th hour, we know there's 3 things that happened. There was darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, there's still darkness. There's the veil of the temple is rent. And Jesus cries and gives up with a loud voice and gives up the ghost. Those 3 things all happened at the end of this 3 hours of darkness at the 9th hour. He's not saying they happened in a certain order. They all just happened. He just happens to mention the veil being rent before he mentions Jesus dying. Is that a contradiction? This is insane. The fact that Bart Ehrman would actually think, as a textual scholar, would think that this is a good example of a contradiction is incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. How easy is it to harmonize these? You don't even have to harmonize them. It's simple. One is just summarizing it in a different order, and another is writing it in another order. It's not saying that they happened chronologically in that order. By the way, chronological order was less important to the first century. Today, we're very concerned with chronological order. But even today, I could tell you a story about something that happened. And if three things happened at the same time, I could tell you those three things in any order, and it wouldn't confuse you chronologically. And then I could mix it up and tell them in different orders. Let's say that I'm a pastor. So let's say I'm preaching on Sunday, and while I'm preaching, someone stands up and starts to scream and yell. And as soon as they stand up, there just happens to be another man nearby who grabs them and pulls them back down. And I say, and one time when I tell the story, I say, a man stood up while I was preaching, and another guy grabbed him and pulled him back down. And another time that I tell it, I could say, I was preaching, and a man stood up, and another man pulled him back down. These are not contradictory stories. I'm just putting it in different order, the things that are happening at the same time, right? So it doesn't really matter what order you put it in if it's all happening together. Matthew and Mark and Luke all suggest that this happens at the same time as best as they can tell. Mark says he gave up the ghost and the veil of the temple was rent. This all happened kind of at the same time. Matthew 27, as best they can tell. Matthew 27 says that Jesus cried with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent. They don't know the exact moment. Nobody was at both locations at the same time. Nobody knows the exact moment that the veil was rent and Jesus died, the exact second. But it seems to them it happened at the same time, so they're telling it together. This is a really bad example of a contradiction. Let's go to number 5. This one is probably, I guess, maybe will confuse people the most. So let's spend more time on this one.
Okay, let me give you another example. Did the disciples see the resurrected Jesus in Galilee, or did they stay in Jerusalem? This relates to one of the issues that Rob was talking about earlier, but it's not the same issue. It's a different issue. In both Matthew and Luke, Jesus is raised from the dead, and he appears to his disciples. Where did the disciples see the resurrected Jesus in Matthew? It's very simple in Matthew. Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene and tells her to go tell the disciples to go to Galilee and meet him there. And they go. And they see Jesus there. And he gives them the Great Commission. And then that's it. Right? So Jesus meets the disciples in Galilee, and that's the only place he meets the disciples. Matthew. Okay, so just make note of it. And then think about Luke for a second. Where did the disciples see the resurrected Jesus in Luke 24? This is a little more complicated story. It's a longer story. The women go to the tomb, and they learn from the two men there that Jesus has been raised from the dead. Okay, he's been raised. And they go to tell the disciples. And the disciples don't believe them. Those crazy women, they're always dreaming up stuff. Disciples don't believe the women. That same day, literally it says, that same day, so this is the day Jesus was raised from the dead, it's the third day after his death. The same day that they discover the tomb, the same day, Jesus appears to two followers on the road to Emmaus. The famous story of the road to Emmaus happens the same day. The two, at that same hour, we're told literally, the same hour of that day, the two go and tell the disciples that they've seen Jesus alive. So this is the day of his resurrection. Okay? Same day, same hour. While they're talking about it, Jesus appears to them. Okay, this is in Jerusalem. Jesus appears to them. And Jesus tells them to stay in Jerusalem, do not leave. You can't say, well, they stayed in Jerusalem, then they left for a few days and came back. No, they're told to stay, and they stay. Or do they go to Galilee? There are very good reasons for this contradiction. You can think of, there are good reasons for it. I mean, there were reasons that Matthew wanted to say one thing and Luke wanted to say another thing. But my point is, they say opposite things. So they both cannot be historically reliable.
Okay, so the real question here is, do they say opposite things, right? So if they do say opposite things that cannot both be true, then they're contradictory and they're not reliable. But Bart Ehrman grossly misrepresents what is written in these Gospels. Grossly. Let me pull up a few of the Gospels here, and we'll read them. Let's start with, by the way, the trip to Galilee by the disciples is mentioned in every Gospel except for Luke, John, Mark, Matthew. They clearly went to Galilee. This is not even a question. It's not like he presents it as if Matthew just made a mistake and said that they went to Galilee, or something like Matthew decided to be divergent. It certainly does not. Matthew says this, that when they went to the tomb, the ladies heard from the angel. Verse 5, and the angel answered, said unto them, fear ye not, for I know, this is in Matthew 28, verse 5, fear ye not, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There ye shall see him. Lo, I have told you. And they departed quickly from the sepulchre with fear and great joy, and did run to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, All hail. And they came and held him by his feet and worshipped him. Then said Jesus, Be not afraid. Go tell my brethren that they go into Galilee. There they shall see me. So they're at the tomb in Matthew. The ladies are at the tomb. The angels say, he's risen. Go tell his disciples that he's risen. And by the way, make sure you get to Galilee, because he's going to see you and meet you in Galilee. Then on the way, they meet Jesus, and he says, again, we're all going to meet. We have this appointed place. We're going to meet in Galilee. Okay, I'm going to give you a place. He actually says this in John. I think it's in, later on in Matthew. It says in verse 16, the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them, and they saw him. So it's not that they couldn't see him until they got to Galilee. There was going to be a specific place that he was going to tell them he was going to see them in Galilee. This, I believe, is where the 500 people all gathered together to see him and saw him all at once. So he's sort of setting an appointment, all right? It's not that he can't appear before Galilee. It's just that in Galilee, at this specific mountain, at the specific time, he's setting an appointment. I will meet you there at this time. And he's going around and sort of promoting this party, if you will, this appointment where he's going to be meeting with all of them, this church meeting, if you will. We're all going to meet in Galilee at this time. So he goes and he appears to them after they're told by the angels about the meeting in Galilee. And he says, he reminds them of the meeting in Galilee. Okay, that's in Matthew. In Mark, it's actually pretty simple. He just said, the angels say, go your way, tell his disciples that he goeth before you into Galilee. There you shall see him. Okay, in John, they're actually told, they actually go to Galilee. You actually see the decision to go to Galilee. And Peter is there waiting for Jesus to show up, and he just says, forget it, I'm going fishing. And while he's fishing, he meets Jesus in Galilee. Jesus is on the shore, and he has another great draught of fishes moment and all this kind of thing. All of these are work together. But now let's look at Luke, because Bart Ehrman's claim says that Matthew, Mark, and John, that all agree that the disciples went to Galilee after to meet Jesus, because he had appointed a place for them to meet after he rose. All of these agree, but he says that Luke disagrees. Here's what Luke actually says. Upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the sepulchre bringing spices. Let's skip down. They saw the men standing by them in shining garments. Verse 5, and as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth, They said unto them, Why seek ye the living among the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre, and told all these things unto the 11, and to all the rest. So Luke doesn't happen to mention that the angels told them to go to Galilee. Is that a contradiction? No, he just doesn't mention it. He's not going to mention everything that's mentioned by the others. Interestingly enough, Matthew and John were one of the 12 disciples. So they were there. They know very specifically what happened. Mark was not one of the disciples, but he was alive and probably around at that time and may have been meeting with the disciples, probably was one of the 500 that met with Jesus in Galilee. Luke, however, joined later and is documenting what other eyewitnesses have said. So he's compiling eyewitness testimonies. He's putting in the things that he thinks is the most helpful for his audience. So he's not going to mention everything that everyone else mentions, because everyone else is going to mention more of a chronological order. Luke is going to be mentioning more of what people have said and what different testimonies that he's gotten. So Luke doesn't mention that they're going to go to Galilee. That's not a contradiction. He just says this. Now, he does say there is something else that happens on the day that Jesus rose. And this is the two on the road to Emmaus. This is in Luke 24, verse 13. Behold, two of them the same day went that same day to a village called Emmaus, which is from Jerusalem, about 60 furlongs. And I won't read you the whole story, but basically as they're walking, they meet Jesus on the road. And Jesus starts to explain to them all the things in the scriptures concerning himself. And it's late that night. They stay in a house. He goes in with them, continues to talk to him. Finally, they realize it's Jesus, and he disappears from in front of them. And they run all the way back to Jerusalem that night. This is Resurrection Day night. And they tell the disciples, he's here. He's alive. We saw him, just like the women said. And then Jesus appears in the room with the disciples. And the disciples see him. But now we know that Jesus appeared in the room with the disciples more than once. So John tells us about him appearing in the room with the disciples once. When Thomas wasn't there, that must have been the Resurrection Day night. Then he appears in the room with the disciples again when Thomas is there. And then he appears in Galilee. Luke doesn't tell us about all of his appearances. He just tells us that Jesus appeared in the room. He says this. And as they thus spake, this is the one time that Luke mentions his appearance. And as they thus spake in verse 36 of Luke 24, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said unto them, Peace be unto you. But they were terrified and affrighted and supposed they had seen a spirit. And he said unto them, Why are you troubled? And why do thoughts arise in your heart? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me have. And when he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they yet believed not for joy, and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here any meat? And they gave him a piece of broiled fish and a honeycomb, and he took it and did eat before them. And he said unto them, These are the words which I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled, which are written in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me. Now it's interesting. There is a paragraph break here. There's a paragraph break. And he took it and did eat before them. Now Luke is saying, this is what happened. Jesus appeared in the room. He ate the food. He took it, did eat before them. Now he's summarizing. Starting in verse 44, Luke begins to just summarize the other things Jesus said while he was on the earth. He said, These are the words which I have spoken. He opened their understanding. He said unto them, Thus is written, and thus it behooved Christ to suffer. And ye are witnesses of these things. And he also said, Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry ye in the city of Jerusalem. Now, why would he say, Tarry ye in the city of Jerusalem, if they were in the city of Jerusalem? Wouldn't he just say, Tarry ye here in Jerusalem? No, he said, Go to Jerusalem and stay there. Why? Because Luke is summarizing the things that Jesus said before he left at this point. He's not giving us the account of the time that Jesus appeared in that room. He's saying, here's the other things Jesus said before he left. And one of the things Jesus said before he left, probably when they were in Galilee, was go back to Jerusalem and stay there until you get power from on high. So that's a really simple solution, actually. Luke doesn't say any of the things that Ehrman needs him to say for it to be a contradiction. So Ehrman, assumes and adds to the story the idea of this immediate, that Jesus immediately said, stay in Jerusalem. Jesus did not immediately say, stay in Jerusalem. Let's go back to that clip. Listen to this again, because this is what Ehrman wants you to think.
The two, at that same hour, we're told literally, the same hour of that day, the two go and tell the disciples that they've seen, the other disciples, they've seen Jesus alive. So this is the day of his resurrection. Okay? Same day, same hour. While they're talking about it, Jesus appears to them. Okay, this is in Jerusalem. Jesus appears to them. And Jesus tells them to stay in Jerusalem, do not leave.
So Ehrman is saying that Jesus, on the same day, says that he said to stay in Jerusalem, do not leave. What he's pointing out is that here, in one point, it's the same day. The next, it's the same day. But then Jesus goes on to say other things that clearly indicate that these are just summaries of other things Jesus said before he left. Because it goes all the way on to when he rises into heaven, which couldn't have happened on the same day. It was already, you can't have so many things all happening on the same day. We are already late at night, and then the same hour they run back, and then Jesus is talking in the midst, and then all of a sudden he's back at Bethany. He walks out to Bethany. All this isn't happening in the same day. As a matter of fact, we know from the other Gospels it happens over a period of 40 days. So Luke is first telling us what happens on one day, and then he stretches out and explains some of the other things that happened before Jesus rose, before Jesus ascended, and then, boom, talk about his ascension. That's it. This is a very simple thing, actually, but Ehrman is misrepresenting what is said in the Gospels, and it's shameful. It really is. We'll get to the other arguments. He has two other arguments that he makes, and we'll get to the other arguments next week. But bear with us on this. Think through these, because these are not contradictions. Just because one writer is summarizing something Jesus says and leaving out something that another writer wrote about doesn't mean that they're contradicting each other. They're only contradictory if they're saying two things that cannot both be true. Jesus could have, it's very easy to think that Jesus could have said to go to Galilee and then said to go back to Jerusalem and stay there. And that's very easily harmonized with the text without any contradiction. And Ehrman is assuming a contradiction where there is none. Contradictions have to be explicitly opposite of one another, where both can't be true. Both of the Gospels, all four of the Gospels can be true. Therefore, this is not an example of a contradiction. And with that, I thank you for watching today. Guys, don't forget to check out our sponsor, White Mountain Munchies, whitemountainmunchies.com. Amazing snack food, and get a promo code when you get a great discount when you use the promo code RAM at checkout. We'll see you next time right here on Point of View.